The rain poured relentlessly, painting the city in streaks of silver as Naomi Carter stepped inside the grandiose halls of Crestwood Bank. The air was thick with the sterile scent of polished wood and currency. She clutched her purse tightly, her heart drumming with an uneasy rhythm. She had been banking here for years, though every visit left her with a nagging discomfort. It wasn't just the cold stares or the dismissive greetings, it was the lingering feeling that she was being watched, judged, diminished. Today, however, was supposed to be different. Today, she had an important transaction to complete, one that should be simple and routine. As she approached the counter, the bank manager, Richard Calloway, stood near the tellers, his presence exuding an air of self-importance. A tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples, he regarded Naomi with the same condescending smirk he always did. Naomi cleared her throat and placed the check on the counter. "I'd like to make a deposit, please." The teller, a young woman with nervous eyes, barely glanced at the amount before her fingers froze on the keyboard. Her gaze flickered toward Calloway, who stepped forward, his expression turning from amused to skeptical as he snatched the check from the counter. "Ma'am," he said, drawing out the word with a chuckle. "This is quite a large amount. Are you sure this check is legitimate?" Naomi stiffened. She had anticipated questions, but not the sheer disbelief in his voice. "Of course, it's legitimate. I wouldn't be here otherwise." Calloway scoffed, turning the check over between his fingers. "You'll have to understand my concern. We don't usually see these kinds of figures from people like you." The words hung in the air, venomous and deliberate. The bank grew silent, all eyes on Naomi. Her throat tightened as a flush of heat crept up her neck. "I own the business that issued that check," she said firmly. "You can verify it if you like." Calloway chuckled, shaking his head. "That won't be necessary. What'll be necessary is a thorough fraud inspection. These things take time, you know. Days, even weeks." Naomi felt a spark of anger flicker beneath her ribs. "That's ridiculous. This is my money, and I expect it to be handled properly." "Listen," Calloway said, lowering his voice, though not enough to hide the sneer. "Maybe if you had dressed a little more professionally, or carried yourself with a bit more decorum, this wouldn't feel so suspicious. But as it stands, I have a duty to protect our institution." A bitter laugh bubbled up inside her. "Protect it from what?" "From me." He offered a mock-sympathetic shrug. "You understand, don't you? Policies are policies." A murmur of agreement rippled through the bystanders. Naomi's fingers curled into fists. The humiliation weighed on her like an iron shackle. But she would not let him win. "You will regret this," she said quietly. "I promise you." Calloway smirked, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "Have a nice day, ma'am." Naomi turned on her heel, the heat of 100 judging eyes burning into her back as she stepped out into the rain. As the heavy doors swung shut behind her, the lights inside the bank flickered. The air turned thick, almost suffocating. A deep, almost imperceptible hum trembled through the marble floor, and for a brief moment, a shadow moved behind Calloway. A shadow that wasn't there before. But no one noticed. Not yet. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. Richard Calloway arrived at the bank earlier than usual, his leather briefcase tucked under one arm, his free hand gripping a steaming cup of black coffee. The air outside was oddly still, the city streets quieter than they should have been. The moment he stepped inside, a chill ran down his spine. The bank's interior was dimmer than usual, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering sporadically. The security guard, usually stationed at the front, was absent. The tellers whispered amongst themselves, their faces pale and drawn. "What's going on?" Calloway demanded. One of the tellers, a timid woman named Lisa, hesitated before answering. "Sir, something strange happened last night." Calloway frowned. "Strange how?" Lisa swallowed hard. "We heard noises. After closing, the cameras caught something." She turned the bank's monitor toward him and played back the footage. The grainy black and white security feed showed the lobby after hours, empty, undisturbed. But then, at precisely 3:13 a.m., the main doors rattled violently, though no one was outside. The chandeliers overhead swayed, as if disturbed by an unseen force. And then the figure appeared. A shadowy silhouette materialized near the teller's counter, standing motionless for several agonizing seconds before gliding toward Calloway's office. The footage cut to static as soon as it reached his door. Calloway's stomach twisted. This is some kind of prank. Lisa shook her head. The cameras never glitched before, sir. And this morning, we found your office door open. But the locks were still in place. A cold dread settled over him. He brushed it off with a forced chuckle. I don't have time for ghost stories. Get back to work. But as the day wore on, the unease only deepened. A heavy silence clung to the air. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Employees whispered of strange drafts and sudden chills. And Calloway, though he refused to admit it, felt it too, something watching him, something waiting. By evening, when the last customer left and the doors were locked, Calloway retreated to his office, determined to put the nonsense behind him. But the moment he sat down at his desk, his computer screen flickered. And then the whispering began. It was faint at first, a breathy murmur just beyond comprehension. He froze, his hands gripping the armrests. The sound grew louder, layered voices overlapping, whispering his name. Calloway. The office temperature plummeted. His breath fogged in front of him. A sudden, violent knock rattled his door. He bolted upright. Who's there? No answer. Heart pounding, he reached for the door handle. But before he could touch it, the lights went out completely. The whisper surged, swelling into an unearthly chorus. Then, from the darkness, a voice, clear, chilling, unmistakable. You will regret this. The same words Naomi had spoken before she left. Calloway stumbled backward, his pulse roaring in his ears. The shadows in the room shifted, twisting into a form, a tall, looming figure with eyes like empty voids. And then it lunged. The next morning, the bank did not open. Police arrived to find the doors locked from the inside. Security footage showed Calloway alone in his office the night before, until, at precisely 3:13 a.m., the screen turned to static. When they finally broke through the doors, they found him huddled in a corner, his hair shock-white, eyes wide with terror. He was alive, but he would never speak again. The bank shut down soon after, its name forever tainted. Those who worked there whispered of Naomi Carter, of her curse, of the shadow that still lingered in its halls. And no one ever saw Richard Calloway again.